You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.
What's going on, Los Angeles? Welcome to the LA Football Show right here on the Mightier 1090 ESPN Radio, LAFB Network, LAFBnetwork.com, your destination for Los Angeles football. It is a beautiful Friday in the Southland. Jamal and I are actually coming at you from beautiful Las Vegas as our USC Trojans take on the Utah Utes in the Pac-12 championship game. It's going on as you are listening to this, but it's going to be a blast. This first part of the show, we are going to do our Chargers segment because guess what? The Chargers are also in Vegas, taking on the Las Vegas Raiders in a very big matchup. Raiders having a down year, but Chargers still need this win, divisional opponent, and kind of just still need to keep proving themselves as a contender in this league. You got the Rams playing the Seahawks this week. We'll wrap up the show with that, and we'll have some UCLA talk as they obviously ended their season finale against Cal, and we'll kind of look towards potential bowl sequences and what players can play and whatnot. So we are appreciative of all of you for tuning in. Like I said, this is the LA Football Show. I'm your host, Ryan Dyer, joined as always by the Madman. What's up, Jamal? Happy Friday. How we doing?
Happy Friday, Rye. Excited to be talking all things football and super fired up about this game coming up here in just a couple of hours with USC and Utah. Maybe the biggest USC football game in the last 5 years, I would say, since that 2017 Rose Bowl game against Penn State. And then you'd have to go probably all the way back to 2008 to find another game quite as big. So super pumped about that being kind of the main course. And then we've got so many delicious appetizers with our other teams and other conversations. So thrilled as always to be doing this with you in fun Sin City.
Exactly. So at the bottom of the hour, we have the great Yogi Roth is joining us to talk about this USC-Utah matchup. For those who don't know, Yogi, works for the Pac-12 Network, has a long history of being in the Pac-12, coaching for USC in some capacity, also played college football for Pittsburgh, and now he's obviously a football analyst for the Pac-12. So great insight there. We'll have that for you at the bottom of the hour. Show is always brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Head to betonline.ag today. Use our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV to get a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Plenty of great games to bet on BetOnline. They have it all. Every sport you can think of, international, local, whatever you want, you can really wager on and hopefully win some money. So head to betonline.ag today. Once again, promo code is BELIEVE. Tell them Ryan and Jamal from the LA Football Network sent you. All right, Jamal, we're going to start with this Chargers game today as they take on the Las Vegas Raiders in Sin City at the stadium we are currently at for the Pac-12 game. They clean it up, change the turf for the Sunday matchup between the Bolts and the Raiders. What are your initial expectations for this game, Jamal?
Ryan, I'm excited for a couple of reasons. One is, can the Chargers build upon that dramatic victory last week over the Cardinals with that incredible two-point conversion play and eking that game out 25-24? And now can they take that next step, get to 2 games in a row, get to 7-5, and really set the stage for this final month of the season going into the playoffs? I think win and you feel very differently about this team. A loss, you sort of fall back to 6-6, and the questions of inconsistency, the questions of play calling, the questions of defensive tackling and positioning all resurface. So for me, this is a prime opportunity for the Chargers in division to make a statement in saying, look, I think that it's too far out of reach to catch the Chiefs at this point in the division, but this is going to be that other playoff team out of this division and into the wild card. I'm also very excited to see the matchup, Ryan, between this Chargers defense and the emergence, the superstardom emergence or reinvention of Josh Jacobs on the Raiders. And he's coming off a historic game, 300 total yards from scrimmage. The first time that's happened in 15 years. Since the great Adrian Peterson of his magical 2,000-yard season back in 2007. And then we saw it in 2002 with Priest Holmes. And then we didn't see it prior to that until the 1980s. So Jacobs is getting on a roll here in a very significant way for the Raiders, giving them an identity and a toughness outside of David Carr in that passing game. And how will Jacobs match up with this Chargers defense that at times you and I have questioned schematically? We've questioned their tackling prowess. We've questioned their toughness a little bit, in particular on the run stopping side of things. So that matchup, I think, is going to be really paramount to see who comes out on top of this game.
I mean, that's the game. I think that's everything. This team, since Joey Bosa has out, I think we've learned, Jamal, I know Joey Bosa is known as a pass rusher, but I think we've really learned that he's very important to that stopping the run game as well. I know he's on the edge and it's about those inside guys and the backers, but the ability he has setting the edge, gap integrity, forcing guys to funnel the opposite way away from him. I think it shows how much they've been missing him, because those first two games were fairly sound. Obviously, week one was against Josh Jacobs, and the rush defense looked fairly good, and they have not looked very good since then. And obviously, injuries have had a big part in that. But that's going to be the whole game. It's funny you mentioned Adrian Peterson. I was literally last night scrolling through I don't even remember which one, some social media, and randomly the Fiesta Bowl highlights of Boise State, Oklahoma popped up. That great game. Adrian Peterson obviously in that game. Boise State upsets Oklahoma. Obviously that's way off topic, but I haven't heard Adrian Peterson in a while. And it was like, that was a great college game. But yeah, Josh Jacobs, historic last week. I mean, they won that game on the backs of Josh Jacobs. And in a sense, this Raiders team, there was a lot of hype around this team. You look at this division, there's a lot of hype around this division. There's a lot of hype around the Broncos, a lot of hype around the Raiders, obviously the Chargers and Chiefs. The Chiefs have obviously lived up to it. The Chargers they're 6-5. So, they haven't totally lived up to it, but they're in it still. And the Raiders and Broncos have been a huge disappointment. And I haven't watched every single Raiders game. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm a Raiders expert, but I think looking at last week's formula, it's almost like, and we've said from the beginning, Jamal, Derek Carr is not a bad quarterback, but he's not a great quarterback. He's definitely the bottom quarter. Well, this year he might be better than Russell Wilson, but going into the year, he was definitely the bottom of this division, but he's probably in that mid-range, 15 to 18 or so. If we're doing rankings, he can win you games. He's not going to lose you a ton, but he's not going to carry teams. And it almost seems like Josh McDaniels at times, knowing he has Devontae Adams, has kind of thought he has Tom Brady back there still. And instead of leaning into Josh Jacobs in this running game, they've gone away from it and kind of tried to air it out a lot and get cute with it. And obviously it hasn't worked out, as they, have an abysmal record and really no shot at the playoffs. So I would expect, Jamal, after last week's performance, that this, and because of what the Chargers have had difficulties with on defense, this is going to be a very run-heavy game. I would honestly be surprised if Derek Carr throws the ball more than 25 times. And I'd be surprised, and we've seen this before, I'd be surprised if of those 25 carries or 25 passes, even one goes further than 10 yards down the field. It's going to be, I think, a dink and dump style game and hand the ball off as much as possible. And if they do that, it's going to be tough sledding for this Chargers team, who have struggled against the run, but also are still banged up and just don't have the bodies to stop a back like Jacobs, unfortunately.
Yeah, Ryan, it's going to be a tough matchup. Obviously a hostile crowd, and there's something about taking yourself out of contention that sometimes when that pressure goes away, it provides clarity of thought. And it feels like McDaniels now, because there's 4-7, even if they win their last 5 games, last 6 games, I think is the only scenario where they have a chance. And even still, I think some things have to break. And obviously the likelihood of that happening is very low. So they're sort of on the edge of legitimacy for this season. And now that's allowed McDaniels to look at that roster in its entirety and say, hey, what do we really have here? And I actually love this new Raiders team the last 2 weeks, where it's the emphasis has been on Jacobs. You mentioned kind of that dink and dunk style off of Jacobs. But what that also allows you to do, Ryan, is go play action and go deep. And Carr is a guy who likes to go vertical. Devontae Adams is one of the 5 best receivers in the sport. And so for me, I think there's a recipe where it's not just going to be Jacobs. It's going to be Jacobs off of a shorter passing game, but they're going to take some shots in play action. And especially when you look at that back end of the Chargers right now, banged up, there's some opportunities here for this to be a very close game. And I think what it does is when you combine the Chargers style of play of dinking and dunking and this Raiders style of play now that's going to be run heavy, I think both teams are going to eat up a lot of clock on each of their possessions. I think possessions are going to be few and far between in this game. And so precision and execution goes even higher in terms of importance. And so that team that makes that mistake, if it's Carr, if it's Herbert, if it's some penalties that gets you off schedule, that could really be the difference in this game, because I think both teams are sort of playing the game in a 10-yard cage in terms of how they're approaching things. And so margin for error becomes very low. And this could be one of those games, even more so than a traditional NFL game, where that one mistake could end up becoming the difference.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you look at even still, I mean, the Chargers trying to get some guys back. And as of, Friday morning, no, Mike Williams didn't practice. Corey Linsley didn't practice. Nasir Adderley was limited, and I'm pretty sure he's wearing a big cast even if he does go. So wrapping up guys, especially the pedigree of a guy like Josh Jacobs, will be difficult. Trey Pipkins did not practice. They're starting right tackle. So they're still not out of the weeds in terms of getting healthy yet. Yes, Keenan Allen's back. Yes, Justin Herbert looks like he's fully back in terms of his ribs. But themselves, they're still wounded. And then going up against the Raiders teams that has absolutely nothing to lose, like you alluded to. And that's when you kind of start throwing the kitchen sink at things and having some fun out there and kind of let your hair down a little bit and throw caution to the wind. And the Chargers, we've seen these last 3 weeks, really, yes, they got the win. And yes, they did throw caution to the wind on that last drive. But overall, they've been kind of that tentative team, like don't want to make the big mistake, don't want to give up the big play, but then they kind of let teams gouge them down the field. They end up giving up, obviously, the big drive at the end of the Chiefs. And so it's very difficult sometimes when you play, as you alluded to, when you play that team that really doesn't give an F anymore about the season. They're just going to go out there and have some fun and throw the ball around the yard and obviously run the ball around the yard, as we've said. And the Chargers have to be very careful to not fall into certain traps, fall into certain things, and get themselves behind early. Now, we have to mention one of the greatest games, Jamal, I've seen really, honestly, ever, was that week 18 game last year in Vegas, the overtime thriller, the late field goal that sent the Raiders to the playoffs and sent the Chargers home. Do you expect similar fireworks in this one, or do you think it's going to be more of a controlled game, as that one was just fireworks all over the place, it felt?
Ryan, before I answer that question, isn't it so funny how things seem to work out, where we have 2 games this week where it's an LA team going to a Vegas team. Both games are rematches. Both games are rematches of these iconic games where the LA team just barely got their heart broken and came to the short end of the stick. And they both feel like revenge games to a certain extent in terms of righting that wrong. So I just find it so ironic that both USC and Utah today, and then Chargers Raiders on Sunday, has that same feel to it. For me, Ryan, in terms of this particular game, I don't see the fireworks of last year. I think the composition of both teams is a little bit different, and their approach is a little bit different. Last year, the Chargers being fully healthy with both Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, Herbert was just in a different place of verticality, and there was a lot going on offensively. Brandon Staley was a lot more aggressive in terms of not just his play calling, but the decision-making around the offense. And then when you look at it on the Raiders side of the field, without having Davante Adams, again, Carr was a little bit more of a gunslinger and peppering the ball around to a bunch of different receivers, a lot of points. I expect this game to be much lower scoring because both offenses have really taken a much more conservative approach with how they want to go about scoring points. Again, like you mentioned, it's going to be very run heavy on the Raiders side. And I don't think the Chargers are going to abandon this short passing game in lieu of the run, especially that they're working Keenan Allen back to 100%. Mike Williams may or may not play. And if he does, what percent is he going to be? So the Chargers are still trying to find themselves, in particular from a verticality standpoint. And I think the Raiders have just sort of found a secret sauce here now with the running game. So I expect this game to be very much lower scoring. I think it's going to be a low 20s type of game, close game, which is a far cry from what we saw last year.
This is kind of it's on topic, I guess, but not totally on topic with this particular game. But it just crossed my mind, and I'm curious, and for the sake of fun back and forth banter, the AFC West, in my opinion, is some of the most storied rivalries. Every division, you can say that. The NFC East has great rivalries. The AFC North has phenomenal rivalries. The NFC North has great rivalries. NFC West, I would say there's good ones, but I wouldn't say they're as strong, at least across the board. Obviously, Niners and Rams is very strong, but I wouldn't say like Rams Cardinals is like a historic rivalry by any means. But to me, really the AFC West, maybe I'm a little biased living in Denver for so many years, but the storylines of, that was the AFL. All those teams basically started in 1960 between the Raiders, Chiefs, Chargers, and Broncos, and kind of were born together, came up in the league, and they've been in the same division since their inception. And so I love the stories and rivalries. And you look at the Chargers, would you say the Raiders are their biggest rival in this division? Or would you say it's the Broncos or Chiefs? Or do you think it's equal across all boards?
It's really interesting, Ryan. It's a great question. And I think the AFC West is the most unique division in football. I have never experienced a division where all four teams hate each other to the extent that these four teams do, and always get up for each other. I know you mentioned the NFC West a little bit. Yeah, Rams, Niners had their moments in the 80s and 90s, but Niners were always the big brother there. Now it's gotten heated again. There was a time with Niners Seahawks for a couple of years there with the Legion of Boom and the Harbaugh teams, but that's faded away. You look at the NFC East, again, is that other division, Cowboys, Commanders, Cowboys, Eagles. I think those are the two that really stand out to me. I think that, but some of those rivalries have also faded away. These, to me, have just sort of stood the test of time. And I actually kind of equate it a little bit here, Ryan, with this particular rivalry as I think the Chargers-Raiders is that the hate is the most between these two from a Chargers perspective, just because of the fan bases. I think they can relate to one another with moving different cities. And I think just stylistically, I think the ethos of fan is very different. And I think they hate each other. And then I think the Chargers Chiefs, at least the last few years, has been a rivalry more out of respect from the Chargers perspective of this is where we are trying to get to. So I think there's definitely sort of a big brother, little brother there. And so I think the Chargers think of the Chiefs as that aspirational team. And I think that they think of the Raiders as just that other person down the street or your next door neighbor who you just hate to death. And you just want to meet on your property line and just beat the snot out of each other. And that's sort of how I think of it. So I think just in terms of pure emotion, I think the Raiders are the Chargers' biggest rival. But I think in terms of bigger picture and vision, I think the Chiefs are the Chargers' biggest rival.
Yeah, I think when you look at the other three teams, they all hate the Chiefs because they can't beat them. That's the team they're chasing for this last 7 years or so since Andy Reid's gotten there, and obviously with the ascension of Pat Mahomes. But I think the history of, and the Chargers and Broncos have had some great years, especially those Jay Cutler, Phillip Rivers years. You go back to the LaDainian Tomlinson days when it was, Elway just ending Elway in his career, a little bit before LT, but the Broncos were coming off a dynasty, and then the Chargers kind of took it over once LT and Phillip Rivers came in. And then, but the Chargers and Raiders, just the fact they were both in California, you had the NorCal versus the SoCal. You also had the LA kind of fan base in the middle that was kind of split a little bit here and there. And now the Chargers are in LA and the Raiders have bailed to Vegas, and just so much history there and so much fun. And I think a lot of it too is, you look at the cultures, and you said very different, but also at the same time, very the same. When you look at the San Diego culture and the Oakland culture, two completely different cities, but also a lot of similar cultural families of where they come from and backgrounds and whatnot. So that's what makes it so fun. So per usual, this segment flew by. So we have about a minute, Jamal. Prediction for this game, who you got and why?
So, Ryan, I think it's going to be a bar fight, and it's fitting that it is that case. I think it's a game that's going to be won or lost in the trenches. I think both teams are going to be black and blue, pun intended, over the course of these 4 quarters, and it's going to be a game of attrition. I think ultimately possessions, like I mentioned, are going to be fewer. I think each team is going to have 8 possessions or less because I think every time they get the ball, the clock's really going to run. Execution is going to be paramount. In the end, though, I trust Justin Herbert in the fourth quarter more than I trust David Carr because each guy's going to have to make a couple of throws in the fourth quarter. I love the Chargers to win this game 23-20, but it's going to be an absolute slugfest. And I think both teams are going to get their chance to win the game in the fourth quarter. And I think the Chargers are going to be the team that ultimately capitalizes on it with Ekeler, with Herbert. Keenan Allen's going to make a big catch. I think Gerald Everett's going to play a big role in that fourth quarter. And I think ultimately they are going to maximize their opportunity in a way the Raiders won't be able to. Come fourth quarter, Jacobs might wear down. They might get a little bit too predictable. Chargers eke it out 23-20.
Love it. I too think the Chargers will win this game. I think Brandon Staley is going to have a great game plan, knowing what the Raiders did in the run game. They won't fully stop Jacobs, but they'll slow him down enough, and it'll be enough of a game where come down to it at the end, they're not going to be able to run the football. They're going to need Derek Carr to go out and win it, and I don't think they'll get that done. I'll go 28-24 Chargers. 4 touchdown passes from Herbert. 2 of those going to Austin Ekeler, though. So you still get the running back involved, but their reception touchdowns. Another big game. We can get this social media quarterback talk out of here for the next big game against the Dolphins, which obviously will be a huge one on prime time the following week. So got to take a quick break.
You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.